Hello and welcome to this edition of Grieving Well. I'm Kelli Connolly. I am the Bereavement Coordinator with VNA, Lutheran Senior Life Hospice and Palliative Care in Butler. I'd like to welcome you today, and as discussed last time, we're going to talk about the basics of grief. Last time we talked about grieving during a pandemic, and today I'd like to go over just the basics, the very raw bones of what grief looks like, what it feels like, and when maybe we need to get some extra help. Grief is a process that is very normal, and it's not something that we are prepared for. Often we get phone calls here at the office with folks just needing to know that what they are feeling and what they are experiencing is okay, and the vast majority of the time it is. The struggle is that when you've never had a great loss, it's hard to understand what is happening. Grief is a process that affects us physically, emotionally, and spiritually, so it really affects our entire being. When we realize that, we're able to understand why we may have some physical symptoms, some emotional symptoms, and some spiritual distress. When we look at the physical symptoms of grief, these are often the ones that are most surprising to people. People often have these physical symptoms during their grieving process, but they fail to realize that they're actually connected to an emotional process. I always recommend to our grievers to get a full physical as soon after your loss as possible to rule out any medical issues. However, many of my grievers present with things like constant headaches, stomach distress, general aches and pains, sleeplessness, and just an overall feeling of complete fatigue. This is actually a very normal manifestation of all of the emotion that goes on during the grief process. Some folks tell me they don't cry, but they have a hard time eating or a hard time keeping their food down. They may not be talking much about their loss, but their head hurts much of the time. I encourage folks always to know that we need to process through the emotions of grief on an emotional and mental level in order to relieve the physical symptoms of the grief process. So what's important is being willing to talk. Isolating ourselves during the grief process is likely one of the most dangerous things we could ever do. I ask my folks to identify their support system. Who is it that is there for you? Who will listen? Who will just allow you to experience your feelings without judgment, without telling you that it's been too long and that you should be over it by now? We need to talk about our story. We need to talk about the person we've lost, and we need to talk about all of the emotions that we're feeling. Your feelings are valid, even if they're not rational. And later on in this series, we'll pick apart some of those emotions that we experience during this process, as some of them are very difficult to navigate. During the physical part of this, in the mourning phase, you may be crying a lot. You may be searching, looking for that person. You may be doing things like organizing things, trying to gain some control of your environment, because death often makes us feel very out of control. This can often lead to emotional reactions that include anxiety, some mild depression, and sometimes even just a need to eat or sleep too much or too little. What's important to know is that all of the emotions of grief are not orderly or in stages. Everyone seems to think that we need to do grief in a certain order or a certain way, and I try so hard to let people know that however you are experiencing your grief, it is okay. It is unique to you. So one minute you may feel angry, and then you may dissolve into tears, only to be laughing a half hour later. And this truly is more of the sphere version of the grief process. It can be unsettling because we don't feel like we have a lot of control over our emotions, but it is normal. And as we heal and as the process continues, the up and down nature, the wave type nature of grief tends to level out quite a bit. Remember that your grief is not going to look like anyone else's. Everyone around you, even if they knew the person you're grieving, is going to grieve different. This is sometimes upsetting for families who just can't seem to understand why their brother or sister, their mother, their son, someone in the family, everyone in the family is grieving differently. Every person is a unique individual. We all have our own ways of coping and dealing with great loss. The key, of course, is finding out what your way of coping is and utilizing that to help you heal through the process. Allowing others to do grief in their own way is important too. Some people cry, and that is their primary expression. Other people write or journal. Some express their grief through art or through physical exertion, and others still will simply just want to talk a lot, and that is okay too. Please be careful not to compare your grief to anyone else's. Your process is unique. Your loved one was a unique person, and so are you, and the relationship that you had with them is also unique. That is why your grief will not look like anyone else's. We also need to recognize that we can actually grieve a friend, a coworker, someone else in our life that is not a family member on a very deep level. It will be hard for others to understand that, but grief is all about the bond that we had with that person. Grief is a process that expresses the pain that we feel when we lose someone who is greatly loved. I'm sure you've heard quotations about the fact that the more we love someone, the harder we grieve them. And to a degree, that's very true. The bond that we form with another person is often what indicates what our grief process will look like. It's why it's possible to grieve someone that was not part of your family or not even in an important place in your life, but that you became close to emotionally. I ask people to think about their bond with the person that they've lost, as it often explains why the emotional reaction is what it is. The most important thing about grief work, which it is work, is to make sure that we are processing those emotions. For some reason, society likes to make us feel like we should just hurry up and get on with life. We should pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, so to speak. However, this is now seen as clearly one of the least effective ways to deal with any type of emotional situation. Grieving, in fact, requires that we process through those emotions openly and often, and this is often what's difficult for many of my folks. Many people say, I cry all the time, or I can't think straight because that person is always on my mind. And in the early days of grief, that is a very normal response. There is much benefit in releasing the emotions, whether it is tears and sadness, whether it is anger, which sometimes people want to avoid, or whether it is just the need to go back and tell our story over and over again. Every time we cry, every time we tell our story, every time we talk about the person that we love, every time we deal with anger in a healthy and constructive manner, we are healing our heart little by little. People often ask, how do I know if I'm grieving the right way? And the truth of the matter is that there is no right or wrong way to grieve. What works for you is what will be best for your own healing. I would like to mention, though, that there are some circumstances in which we can enter into what is considered a complex or complicated grief process. When that happens, instead of our emotions being variable and kind of going up and down and around in the sphere, instead we are pretty consistently feeling down. Maybe you're having trouble getting out of bed. Maybe you're not functioning and you're just not able to take care of yourself. You're feeling like you don't know how you're going to go on. You can't maintain your job or your normal daily responsibilities. If this is the case, I would like to ask that you reach out for support. We are very happy to provide a session to all of our community friends. VNA has been around for 40 years providing home care, palliative care, hospice care, and complete bereavement services to all those in the community. So if you feel like you are struggling with your grief, We would love to have you call our office and ask for an appointment with one of our grief specialists. Our number here is 724-431-3520. I remind you that at this time it is important to take extra good care of you. Make sure that your diet is regulated. Make sure you're getting a little bit of exercise each day. Make sure that you're connecting to others and drinking lots of fluids to replace some of the tears if you have those. And remember that you are important. One of the things that people struggle with is wanting to help everyone else after a loss, but please remember to turn that focus of help and support toward yourself and reach out to us if we can help you as well. Thank you so much.